guys. Sorry, we're about to start. If you guys could go ahead and just silence your phones real quick. Oh. Hello? 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 We're gonna get started in a few minutes, but if you guys can go ahead and silence your phones, that would be much appreciated. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the American Trailblazers panel. My name is Jasmine, and I am an intern here at OPM in the Office of the Director. It's been less than a month that I've been here with OPM, and I've already had the chance to chat with and work with some amazing people in our federal workforce. And before we get started with the panel, I wanted to remind you all to please silence your phones and electronic devices. And do not forget that for all the interns and intern supervisors, there will be a networking hour immediately following today's panel at the OPM cafeteria down the hall. People will direct you there. And for the people who are attending virtually, please join the link for a virtual networking hour at 12:15. Lastly, if you aren't already, make sure you're signed up for the Intern Experience Program's weekly newsletter, Internally Speaking, so you never miss out on awesome events like these. With that aside, we can now welcome our speakers to the stage. Please join me in welcoming OPM's own acting director, Rob Schreiber, to the stage. From the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, please welcome Chair Charlotte Burrows to the stage. Now for Deputy Administrator Dalaver Saeed from the U.S. Small Business Administration. From the U.S. Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, Chair Sarah Bronin. Right. And last but certainly not least, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Assistant Secretary Lois Pace. Okay. And now over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Jasmine, for that kind introduction. Um, what a fantastic group of speakers we have today. I'm really excited to be here, excited to see all of you. We have a fantastic group of interns at OPM, and I'm also happy to see interns and intern supervisors from across the government, both here in the room and on the screen today. Whenever I connect with a new audience to government or a younger audience, I always like to kind of level set about OPM. And so, can I see a show of hands? How many of you in the audience know what OPM does? Okay, good. That's more than I thought because, some government agencies have very obvious roles like the EPA, right? They protect our environment. The VA serves our veterans. The Defense Department protects us. What does OPM do? Well, we help agencies build and we support the largest and most complex workforce in the nation. 2.3 million federal employees around the world. We set HR policy. We manage government wide HR data. And we administer benefit programs like the largest group health insurance program in the world and the most complex retirement system in the world. So that's what OPM does. And we also put together this intern experience program that you're participating in today. We know that it all starts with people like you who are early in your careers and excited to join the civil service. That's why I really love being a part of events like this and getting to be here today with our incredible panelists. Um, our panelists, you are all trailblazers in your field, some of the firsts of your background to accomplish your achievements and obtain these positions. And you really just an incredible example to the interns and public servants across the United States. Um, Immediately to my left, Chair Charlotte Burrows, who spent her entire career fighting for equal opportunity and is the chair of the entire Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Um, Next to Charlotte is Deputy Administrator Dilawar Syed. He immigrated from Pakistan as a young college student and is now the senior most Muslim American in the entire Biden Harris administration. Chair Sarah Bronin is not only the first Mexican American to fill her position at the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, but the first person of color to hold the position. And Assistant Secretary Lois Pace represents the U.S. public health interests on the global stage. She has traveled the world and spent time early in her career working at the grassroots level in Africa and Asia. What an impressive group. I can only imagine the stories of how each of you have grown into the leaders that you are today. I will start just by telling you a little bit about my journey. So, I am the son of two school teachers who worked in the same public school system their entire careers, one employer. And so I started out when I was in law school as a law clerk, working at a labor union. And I was studying international law at the time, and I thought I wanted to go into international law. But I enjoyed the job at the labor union so much that after I graduated, I was able to stay on there. And I thought that I would follow a similar path to my parents and work there actually for 13 years. Um, then a man came along and upended all of that for me personally. Barack Obama ran for president, and my job at the union was to sue the federal government. And when he got elected, I didn't want to sue the federal government anymore. I wanted to be a part of the administration. So I was able to come in to OPM. And so after 13 years working at one employer, over the next 15 years of my career, I've worked for four different employers in 10 different roles. And every one of them has been incredibly valuable. I wound up taking a turn into the Affordable Care Act world after that law was enacted, something I never thought I would be involved in. So you just never know where you're going to go, especially once you get into government, because the hardest job to get is your first job in government. And then once you get that first job, it's a lot easier to move around. So I was going to start just by opening up to any panelist who wants to jump in with a question that may be a loaded question given the audience in the room. But what excites you about Gen Z entering the workforce? What benefits and contributions do you think young people can bring to the federal government? Open it up to anybody who wants to jump in first.
Okay.
Joyce?
Good morning. Thanks for having me, first off. And it's really nice to be here at a table of other firsts. I don't know if I've been able to be on a panel like this before, but in terms of what excites me about Gen Z, frankly, I think Gen Z, and you all can correct me if I'm wrong, is fluent in systems and justice. And I think while there have been generations before you who certainly have cared about those issues, I think there is a fervor with which I find this generation approaching that type of work unapologetically and bringing it to these, frankly, traditional or historic places like government. And so that's really quite valuable. It's not just existing on the outside and pushing in, but it's actually coming into the space. And so it's all the more reason I'm excited that you all are thinking about careers here because I think it will help government change from the inside out. Um, Thanks again for inviting me here, and it's really fun to be here. My day job, other than when I'm an appointee, is as a professor. So that's really what I have spent my career doing. So I've been lucky to work with students, and I'm totally committed to bringing students into the work of my agency, which relates to historic preservation, a field that has um, I guess it's the nature of people in preservation is that we always want to keep things the way they are. That's sort of, some in some ways the definition of preservation. But a field like ours needs fresh perspectives, and I think you're totally right that this generation cares about equity, cares about justice. Cares about in the historic preservation field whose stories are represented, how we represent and tell stories that have not been told before. And I would add, too, that this generation is very interested in climate change and housing justice. And those are issues that our field needs to tackle, and that the interns at our agency, including one I see, an intern alum in the audience here today, have brought a fresh perspective, have brought a commitment to data, have brought an enthusiasm for research that I think has really benefited our agency's work, and that over time will benefit the field of historic preservation, which, although always rooted in the past, by definition, really needs to continue to look towards the future, and that's what we're trying to do. And I think our the interns that work at our agency and others who have been interested in the field and who participate in our events and add their own stories to I guess the American story is essential to our work. So thank you.
Since you're following the order, I'll go next. Great to be here, Rob. Thanks for having me, and great to be with all of you. So a couple of things I would say. I think one, at a more functional level, I come from the tech world, so I have this observation that Gen Z is arguably the first digital native generation, and you grew up uh, in a digital world. You didn't make a transition, and I think it's interesting when, as government, we serve constituent to have that perspective in this era, which is now an era of AI. How do we engage and speak and connect with the constituents with that worldview that Gen Z has, that many of us had to go through in a transition in our lifetime? Second, and I want to build on what Sarah said and Lois said in terms of the commitment on causes, but I think it's not just topical, it's also, when you are in earlier stage in your career, if I may say, there is a greater, deeper, perhaps set of convictions we have. We get a little bit more pragmatic as we journey through our careers. And the 20-year ago myself version had some more, if you will, idealistic view of the things. And I'm saying this in a very respectful way. It's important to have a mix of both in government, folks who have had experience, but also folks who feel very strongly about convictions. And frankly, especially at this moment in time, as we speak, both what's happening in the country, what's happening in the world, to have those diverse perspectives, people's views and lived experiences as part of policy making and our delivery of service to our constituents.
I would agree with all of that. And hello, it's a delight to be here. Um, I am personally excited about the little bit of impatience that brings to that Gen Z brings to in government. We are so amazing in the federal government and do so many different things, but we are not known for speed necessarily. I am myself a little bit impatient, and so having that challenge to really get results is a push. And that brings a certain synergy, as well as the familiarity with the concepts of justice and democracy and inclusion that have, I think, over the lifetime of just looking at our commission, which was created by the 1964 Act, Civil Rights Act, which is going to have its 60th anniversary just in a few weeks here on July 2nd. That that arc has really taught America to think differently about what it means to be a democracy and to be inclusive of everyone. And we've gotten to a point where there's a real fluency, I think, that Gen Z has that previous generations did not in those concepts, maybe in writing, but not in practice, not having seen it, not being in a position to take it for granted. And given that I'm in the civil rights business, that is very energizing for all of us. So it's great to be
Thanks. I think you can tell that we're real excited about Gen Z coming into the federal workforce, and that old Uncle Sam saying, "We want you." It really does apply. I am able to be on this group with the deputy administrator. It's called the President's Management Council, and it's all of the deputy secretaries from across the government, and we get together every month. And you would not believe how much we talk about bringing early career talent into the federal government, the people at the highest levels of the administration. And I know all of us here, we're all committed to that. And we talk about it a whole lot. How can we make the government a more attractive employer? What are the obstacles to bringing early career talent in? How can we be more competitive as agencies with the other opportunities that you all have? And it's because of all of the reasons that the panelists mentioned about the strengths that you bring. So we want you to make sure you hear that message from us loud and clear today. Um, Chair Burrows, if I could start with you this time. So you have a storied career in fighting for the advancement of diversity and inclusion, making sure people are treated fairly, for combating harassment. You've worked on Capitol Hill, the Department of Justice, and now you're chair of the EEOC. Looking back to early on in your career, do you have a defining moment, maybe when you were a student or an intern, that you refer back to, a moment that helped you on your journey to becoming the leader of the EEOC today?
Well, I'm sure there are many. I think the one that comes to mind as we sit here today is I used to do these cases when I got to go to court, which I loved. If anyone's interested in litigating, I definitely recommend trying it on, where you would, I did civil rights cases, employment litigation for the most part. And I was litigating in a series of cases that involved construction and questions about discrimination against owners of construction and the ways in which people are shut out of those opportunities. And I, I had the experience because I lived in DC and I would go out, to Nebraska, to all over the country and do these cases and do depositions and talk to people. But in DC, then as now, frankly, there was a, construction site on pretty much every corner. And I would look and every time there weren't any women. And I started, I was a biker and so I still am and would bike to work and I'm looking and I'm seeing no women on these construction sites. And every now and then you would see, someone holding the signs. So not learning the skills, not becoming an electrician, not doing the skilled trade work that gets you some pretty good salaries, but just holding the signs, stop, go for the traffic, right? To just, you've seen that. That was it. That was the extent, sum total of what women were doing. And there was also, pretty straightforward, stratified racial classifications as well on the job site. And I just remember being in at that time the library of one of the building where the Justice Department Civil Rights Division litigators were. I'm looking down on this construction site and thinking, you know what? This is just wrong. And I think what I'm going to do is keep doing these cases until we can change that. Even though I felt like it was going to be unlikely, it was going to be hard. It was me. And I felt like, look, general contractors have so much money. But I'm just going to be that little bit of sand in these particular gears. And, you know, after that, continue to do these cases. And we had a lot of success. I will not pretend that it changed everything, but I will say I was very excited. There was the first time on my bike ride. Um, about 5 or 6 years later, where I saw there was a woman with a white hat, which means she's commanding someone. She was not holding a sign, but at that time was really sort of indicating, and she had her plans and indicating what was going to happen on the job site. And I remember sort of biking past that and thinking, okay, we're making some progress. So persistence
I,
is my takeaway from that.
I love that, Chair. And I especially appreciate the sand in the gears because a lot of times, it can take years to see that change happen. And the people that are putting the sand in the gears day in and day out to advance that change, it's such a critical role. And then when you get to then come into a position where you're making those decisions, it's really rewarding. Let me move on to Deputy Administrator Syed. So, you immigrated to the United States as a young college student. You went on to become a CEO, and now you're the Deputy Administrator at the Small Business Administration. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that you really embody the American dream. Do you have any advice for those in the room or who are watching who may be in a similar position, maybe having just immigrated to the US, or who may be the first people in their families to go to college or enter the professional workforce?
Well, I mean, frankly, if you asked me 32 years ago that when I came here as a international student to a small college called Worcester in Worcester, Ohio, that I'll be sitting here 30 years from now in the cabinet, no, I would have not dreamt that. But what I knew then, and what I still would say people who are in similar tracks, and no matter what your background, what your path is, that you can dream big and you can be very, clear-eyed about what you want to do. I felt very strongly always that you have to have a career that is, frankly, more impactful. A lot of times, immigrants, if I may say, tend to have more of an economic migration focus. And even early days, had a strong view that I want to do more than just an economic opportunity. How can I be part of what I am now on this journey as a full citizen? And so my advice would be is to don't cut short, if you will, yourself. You are here. This is your country, and we are a nation of immigrants. And frankly, I often say in my career, I've built businesses globally. I've traveled around the world. What distinguishes this country from the rest of the world is that in this place, no matter who you are, where you come from, what you look like, what your background, what your religion is, you get to do what you're capable of doing, and you never ever give up in that process. So for me, that sense of ideals, which is what brought me here, was very clear. And I would just say, if you are in a similar role, you can be here. You can be even higher than where I am today. Absolutely, it's possible in the United States of America. And by the way, on that note, we have to work very hard to preserve these ideals. These are not to be taken for granted. That's why the president, when you look at the focus on his agenda in terms of making sure there's equity, making sure we are persisting with who we are as a nation, our character, our democracy. This is not an abstract concept that we can once put in place, it will stay on. You have to keep at it. You have to preserve it. And part of the job as some public servants today is for us to make sure we deliver, help lift everyone, so we strengthen our democracy and make sure everyone has the opportunity to live their full lives.
Yeah, and that's another thing that we really do work on across all of our agencies all the time is making sure that we are advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility for the federal workforce. You have leadership level commitment. You have a president who has put together the most diverse cabinet in the history of our country. And we're working on things like expanding paid internships, right? Because you're not getting paid, that's a real obstacle. We do things like prohibit consideration of your prior salary history when you come into the federal government because the federal pay system is actually a lot more equitable than the private sector pay system. And so we don't want any discrimination that may have artificially suppressed pay in the private sector to come in when you come in to the government. Um, and just we look at barriers. We look at the way that we hire. We just recently refreshed our Pathways program because it had traditionally been focused on 4-year degrees, but now we've opened it up to community colleges and technical programs and people that do registered apprenticeship programs, people that do job corps. And this is the kind of stuff that's happening at all of our agencies all the time is we're working to break down barriers so that the federal workforce, the 2.3 million strong, looks like the country that we're serving. So thank you, Deputy Administrator. Let me pivot to Chair Bronin. So you, Chair, are currently taking leave from your tenured position as a professor at Cornell University in order to chair the ACHP. We were chatting before, and we each have 3 kids, and mine are a little older than Chair Bronin's, and they've started to think about their careers. And the one thing that I hear from them is they don't want to be locked in to any specific job, like the old way of doing things like my parents did, where they worked for 30 years, 35 years for the same employer. So, given that you've been able to figure out how to balance your life in academia and come into government, do you have any advice for those in the audience who may be thinking about those issues, about how they can balance their interest in trying out a lot of different things with the need for a career?
Sure. So my background is I'm both an architect and an attorney, and so the inquiries that I have pursued in academic work are all about laws and the built environment, and basically how laws dictate what we see and how we experience our cities. So in many ways, I feel like it's the same questions that I think about at the agency as I think about in academic work, and it's the same approach that I bring to this agency that I have taken in my time as a professor. So, in some ways, I don't view anything that I'm doing as really distinct from each other. I view everything as harmonizing, as building towards my own personal goals, which are first and foremost the pursuit of knowledge in service of positive change for society. If you look, many of you are, I assume all of you are still in school. Like me, you're in the midst of your pursuit of knowledge, your pursuit of self expansion, cultivating your interests, identifying your interests. I still feel like I'm doing that today. And I still feel like in everything I do at the agency, I'm still learning. I've written 2 textbooks on historic preservation law and land use law. I've researched property law. I've like really delved into these issues that our agency is tackling, but that was never the full story. Now I'm seeing how it works in practice. And I'm learning a lot in specific areas that I've never, looked at really in depth before. And I would count one of the biggest areas as the work of our agency when it comes to tribal and indigenous peoples, which is again, one of those good tribal and indigenous peoples, their stories, their places have sometimes been well protected by federal laws, sometimes not. I'm learning how we as an agency can do better on that, and that's I think an area where, again, I bring to understanding that I bring to the agency as a whole just really the same curiosity and the same hope that the information that's being given to us, the information that other researchers are putting out there, the information that staff and interns are gathering, information, just all the inputs that we get from public engagement and from tribal and Native Hawaiian consultation, that all of that is coming in and that it's going to be, sort of pushed back out into the world in the form of something that makes a positive change in our field. So I guess, just to flip the question a bit, I think one of the things that you can do in your career is to see how everything that you're doing is building towards something and to see these multifaceted aspects of your training. Should you pursue multiple degrees beyond whatever you're pursuing now, different jobs that you might have? What are your core values? What is it you most want to get out of it? And how can you build towards that even as you are physically doing different things and learning different things? But for me, the common theme is I'm still learning and still trying to find the best ways to serve the public, like we all are.
I really like that. I think the two places where I think you find people that are most knowledgeable and most passionate about their particular areas are in government and academia. You just like there's a real shared passion for the work, and uh, Chair Bronin, really it resonated with me about you're discussing how each job kind of builds and builds on your career. And I would say that even the tough jobs, even the jobs where the experience isn't the best, there's something to take away from it, something to take away from each one of them as you're putting together those building blocks of where you want to go in your career. Um, let's pivot to Assistant Secretary Pace. As I mentioned, one thing that I love about federal employees is their passion for their work and their commitment to public service. And that often shows up very early in their lives. And you seem to be no exception to that. It seems that your love for public health has been guiding you ever since you were a college student. And so, looking back at your time as a college student and since, was there a light bulb moment when you knew you wanted to commit to advancing equity in public health?
Goodness. Well, yes. I think it really came up for me um, when I would go home from college. So I went to school in California, where I'm from, but I grew up in the inner city, which was very different from Palo Alto. And just the stark differences between South Central Los Angeles and, that part of Northern California was really just something that always struck me. And I had a similar experience given I had gone away to boarding school actually for high school. So here I was experiencing these other worlds and yet coming home and I was an athlete in college and in high school. And so I'd have to train, but I'd have to think about when I could actually run in the neighborhood, right? And because of the gun and gang violence. And I also had to think about where I could actually pick up groceries, right? Because I lived in a food desert. And so I just, it was something to be exposed to something different. And it sounds strange to say, I don't think I'm not that far along in my life that I would be able to tell this kind of story, but that was my reality, right? And frankly, even my situation in Los Angeles was better than what my parents had, right? Growing up before civil rights, integrating their schools and picking cotton and other things in the South. So I think my people instilled in me this capacity to and this ability to see and want differently. Not everyone has that, and one of the things that I regret, and one of the ways I approach this work, is by thinking about all of the people I grew up with who didn't have that mindset, who didn't, you couldn't see beyond the horizon, and of course not, because the system is so oppressive by design. But every day that I've shown up in the public health space in particular, I've kept in mind that very personal experience. And especially when I think about health and healthcare discrimination and being pregnant as a teenager and moving through the foster care system, right? Like these are not just stories I hear; they're my stories that I tell, and it allows me to show up as my most authentic self, which can be quite scary, I would say, as a first, right? I remember my mother being very concerned when I started to tell my story. And there's I don't know if people do this anymore, but there's this concept of code switching and the way that you're supposed to present when you end up at a place like Stanford, when you end up at a place like Andover, when you end up at a place like the Department of Health and Human Services. But the reality is people can tell when you're faking it. And it's much harder to connect and advance the agenda when I'm not fully myself, and I've had to learn that over time as well.
Thank you for sharing that personal story. I think it's amazing. And there is no substitute for those life experiences. They shape who you are and how you look at the issues that we grapple with in the government. And so, picking up on Assistant Secretary Pace's story, one of the things I would put out to all of you is that when you are interviewing for a job, find a way to connect like that. Find a way to bring your personal story in, because we're all looking at a bunch of resumes and people have lots of qualifications and they've done lots of amazing things. And having a personal story like that and being able to tell it really helps you stand out, because, as I said, there's really no substitute for that. Um, okay, I'm going to now open back up to the panel. Maybe we can start with Chair Burrows this time and go down this way, if that's okay. So, as I mentioned, the Biden-Harris administration has the most diverse agency leadership of any administration by far, and it's really something to be proud of. It's incredibly important for young people to see themselves reflected at all levels of government. And I think that creating opportunities for young, capable people across states, across backgrounds, across sectors is one of the most important duties that we have as leaders in the government. So I'd like each of you to tell us about an important mentor or person who has been particularly impactful in shaping you as the leader that you are today. And also, if you could think about telling us about when you realized for the first time that you actually are a mentor, and what that experience was like, and how you navigated maybe like both having a mentor and being a mentor.
Okay, I think you said I should start. I think I made the mistake, which I hope you all are smart enough to make, for a lot of times of trying to look like I had it all together. So I ended up, I think that maybe contributed to having perhaps fewer mentors than I probably would have liked. Um, but the one for sure that I think about constantly, actually, I was lucky enough for a period after I'd been litigating. I was at the Justice Department twice, and in between those two stints at the Justice Department, I worked on Capitol Hill for the late Senator Edward Kennedy. And he was a really fascinating person because of his phenomenal history and the reach that his office had and the experience that he had all the way from his first floor speech on the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which I ended up having this connection to now working at the EEOC. But what I remembered most about him, two things, was that he had an enormous empathy, even though he was somebody who, it's very few people who have that kind of life, right? Very much had all the, sort of economic advantages, the political experience, etc. But he had such enormous, sincere empathy. And I think it came from having been maybe the youngest of a big family, and being, sort of like that exuberant kid. But also he told me once that when he was little, because there were, I think, 9 of them, and he was the youngest, he spent a lot of time with his grandfather. And that his grandfather used to like to take him to parts of Boston where there were much less wealthy Irish living. And at the time in his childhood, there were still signs hanging that said no Irish or dogs in this establishment. And his grandfather would talk to him about what that meant and why they couldn't go inside and why the other Irish people who did not have their wealth were certainly not going to get inside. And that gave him the ability to, and I saw this so many times, to go into African American churches and connect, to stand in front of large crowds of farm workers and connect. And in his sort of Boston accent, say something like "Si se pueda," and everyone is saying it too because they could feel that he understood on some basic way that there's this connection. And so he was, I think, a mentor to me in the sense that he was able to inspire. And I remember so often going to the floor, particularly when we were in the minority. And he was sort of embodied that spirit. If I can quote Shakespeare a little bit of the Henry V at Agincourt, we few, we lucky few, it didn't, he never looked back to see if was someone following, but looked for the, in a savvy way, of course, but looked for the true north, the moral compass, and was so inspiring in doing that and figured out what's going to matter to people at the end of the day. And that was really mentored me in a way of just seeing by example of how to remember what's important. And that certainly doesn't mean that he didn't have a good political antenna, but at the end of the day, when there were so many different political crosswinds, he would just figure out what was right and decide that, that's what we're going to do anyway, often knowing he was gonna lose the vote, right? And every single time there were at least 20, 30 other members who were, okay, what's Kennedy doing? We're gonna come with them because that was kind of the way he led. So I felt very fortunate to have worked with him and seen that up close.
Deputy Administrator.
So I would say I can't necessarily count on any one mentor, but I've had many learning opportunities from several folks in business where I spent more than 20 years in Silicon Valley. One of the benefits of working in the tech industry is it is still a new industry and there is no playbook, and you really learn from each other. You see how someone built a certain product and how scaled a business. So I relied on these folks. I've learned from my customers, trying to explain something and seeing how can I better communicate. I literally take those learnings to this day in terms of how I communicate to 3,000 plus people at the SBA every single day. But I think at a more policy level, to your point, I have actually sought and sometimes deliberately sought inspiration to make sure that guides our work on the policy front. So in college, frankly, reading Malcolm X's biography for me was a formative experience. To see a man who turned around his life in a very short span of age, had so much impact. Dr. King, visiting his resting place, and then I went to our Atlanta office and I spoke to a team and I said, look, our work on economic justice still continues on even 30, 40 years later. Visiting Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was, by the way, one of the most emotional experience for me to stand on this burnt down ground that if only a couple of companies had taken off, they'd be probably $2 companies today. If you don't know, this is the Black Wall Street that was burnt down in in a massacre almost 100 years ago. And the president, just so you know, this is how it connects, how history connects to policy and our delivery today. On the 100-year anniversary of the burning of the Black Wall Street, the president visited Tulsa, Oklahoma in 2022, and he said, we're going to have 15% of the entire federal government contract spend, which is about $700 billion a year, goes towards socially and economically disadvantaged entrepreneurs, Black entrepreneurs, Hispanic entrepreneurs, veteran entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs. And so seeking these opportunities where I can frankly inspire and try to even imagine what so many folks who've been held back systemically have gone through and how we have the privilege now to help change some of that. And so that's what guides me, both lessons learned at an operating level, but more at a policy and an inspirational level, just looking at our own history and placing yourself. And let me just say something, I think you alluded to this as well. That learning and growth must go on throughout your career. Because we are delivering on a new set of challenges as we speak. I mean, if you look at the post-pandemic recovery, during which 1/4 of all Black-owned businesses shut down, some of them never to come back. We never even knew that reality, right? So you have to constantly seek opportunities to learn, grow, and be inspired. So thank you.
Thank you. I still wonder how it could be that it wasn't until well into my adult life that I learned about the Tulsa Massacre. Um, Something to ponder. Uh, Chair Bronin.
Yeah, and I think that just on the last point, that speaks to the fact that our history books are not complete. And that's part of the responsibility of not only our agency, but others across federal government as well. On the question of mentorship, I've had so many people that have just guided my experience along the way, first and foremost professors in college, starting at UT Austin, and beyond. But I think the people who had the most impact on my mindset were actually my grandparents, who I lived with and with my family. We all lived together, multi-generational under one roof for many years. Who every day I worked in their restaurant, their Mexican restaurant, when I was starting at 0. I was at the restaurant and, bussing tables, waiting on tables until, ninth grade when they were done with the restaurants. But that experience taught me there is no one who outworks a small restaurant owner, and that there is a huge value in just working harder than everybody else. And so when I saw how hard they worked, I've never one day worked as hard in my life as I know they worked. So they've set the standard for me in terms of the things that I need to do just on a daily basis. In my career, and their career was making people these amazing meals and making them happy. I think that's on the personal side. On the professional side, I think one of the inspirations to me was Justice Sonia Sotomayor, whose office I clerked in when I was a student for a summer when she was in the Second Circuit. The way she approaches her opinions, her sense of humor, her excellence in just clarity of thought, writing, and her dignity across so many different dimensions, I think, is totally inspiring to me. She also, in certain key points of my career, sort of made a guiding comment that set me on my way. And actually, when I was confirmed for this position, she swore me in. Which is really amazing. So I would count her as my, maybe my biggest inspiration for all that she's been able to do. You also asked about serving as a mentor, and I would say that's one of the things that I take most seriously. I'll be everybody's mentor if you want. Just find me. I'm available. I have office hours for students, and I encourage anybody who's interested in historic preservation to join them. I have them twice a semester in fall and spring. Just get online, and whatever questions that students want to ask me, I'm there. Again, we've opened our agency for many more internships that we've had before. And essentially, what I would encourage, anybody who's working, who aspires to have a mentor, or to be mentored by any of us, including me, just ask that mentor questions. Like, ask them. I have had interns that don't ask me anything, and they just sort of think, maybe like you did, Charlotte. Well, if I just seem totally put together, it's fine. So I kind of try to tease that out a little bit, but I think just that back and forth with people in your life can make a difference. At least it did with me. And so do not be afraid to just say, well, why did you do that? Or how did you get here? Or why are you giving me this assignment? Like, what's the big picture here? Ask questions and keep in touch, because I really value the relationships I built with former students, with former interns over the years. I write tons of letters of recommendation, and encourage people, as I've been encouraged to aspire to do more. So as interns, cultivate your mentors just like they are cultivating you, because it's really a two-way street.
Yeah, I think I might build on what everyone has said actually, and certainly seconding what was just said about how much I gain from mentoring. And I very much appreciate the ways my mentees have really opened my eyes and heart and mind to these different perspectives and ways that I should be thinking about and approaching the work that I do every day, and even aspects of my personal life and not just my professional life. But Chair Bronan, you really talked about the value of showing up for people, and even just setting office hours, for example, is something that I've done myself. And I think that that's been helpful, because I think there are folks who are a bit shy to approach you, and it seems to just create space for people who might not feel comfortable or feel like they have the best or most direct access to me. It's even something that I open up to um, other staff, right? So it's not only for interns, but perhaps more junior employees who just feel they want to, have time with the head of office. And I know it's something that my directors have appreciated me doing, and it's something I've encouraged them to do as well. Um, DA Syed also talked about how he reaches out to people at his level, or otherwise, thinks about mentoring not just as this this work that we do, kind of top down work that we do. But I know that I've gained quite a bit from, especially as a woman leader, pulling together other women, particularly when I was running an organization. You're serving as a CEO. I was fairly young, and I was the first in that capacity as well. And I started this small but mighty group of women who similarly worked in the global health space. And, we did what Chair Burrows was talking about, right? We were honest about some of the challenges we were facing. I think, many of us as women feel like we have to fake it. We have to come in and know all of the things, and we can't admit otherwise. And it was just so powerful to convene this group on a regular basis and really ask questions about board development and governance or fundraising, or especially when the pandemic hit, goodness, like how we were all managing that. And that's another thing I'll say about mentoring, right? Often it is, just about how one can develop individually, but it can really be powerful for one's institution. And in the work that we were doing, particularly in global health, and in the work I continue to do, it's been quite powerful for me to be able to tap into and otherwise draw from the people around me to just show up as my best self on behalf of the American people.
Thank you so much for your comments on mentorship. We have just about 3 minutes left. And so I wondered if we could just go down the line again, starting with you, Assistant Secretary Pace. If any of you have any final words, we have a room full of interns here. We have several hundred interns online. We also have some intern supervisors in the audience. So any final words for the group?
I would just say, I know I've said a lot about authenticity, but I'm not so naive to think that people aren't always ready for how we show up. So I think being ready for that and knowing what that looks like, there are times when certainly we all need to course correct. But I got some great advice from someone I respect, who said, Lois, sometimes it's not that you're incorrect; it's that you're inconvenient. So I think that's something that I would encourage you to keep in mind.
I would just say, continue to keep learning, continue to ask questions, continue to challenge the way things are done. The federal government, even the federal government can change. Even, your ideas can help to inform necessary change, whether it's at a small agency like ours, a huge agency like some of the others represented here. Keep asking questions and keep pushing for change.
Look, I think government is made up of people, and for us to be relevant, let me speak for SBA. We serve the small businesses, and they are the engine of our economy. For us to be relevant to the next generation of entrepreneurs in our country, we have to have new talent. We have to have young talent. So I would pitch very hard for you to consider interning for US government, for SBA. Bring your talent. And as my fellow panelists said, you can actually shape things. And I think part of it is one thing that keep me up at night with as a deputy administrator of the agency is how do you get the new talent and get them enabled to serve as the next generation of public servants. We also do disaster recovery, we do entrepreneurship support, we do funding, $500 billion worth of portfolio overall that we're managing, and that has to be managed with the next generation of talent. And it starts with these internships. So we'll pitch hard, and for you to hopefully see and get inspired that there is some amazing people who are on the stage. My fellow panelists, not I don't want to include myself necessarily in that yet, but thank you again for considering, and we'll welcome some of you in the agencies.
Well, I will include you in that. I am inspired by all of you and so glad to have the chance to speak to each of you today. I think what I would say is just echoing what everyone else has said. It's important to ask questions. Context is enormously important. The most important question is always why. So be sure to use those opportunities to do that, to cultivate the relationships with the people who are your mentors, but also with each other, that it's great to have a cohort too. You need different kinds of mentor. You can mentor your peers. It's really important. And I think the last thing I would say is, in each room that you go into, in each meeting, think about the unique perspective that you have, and think about, you're in the meeting, so you get to really be in the meeting. If there's something that you think you want to say that will contribute, you should say it. Now, you don't commandeer the whole, don't say, Chair Burrow said I get to, drive the whole conversation. That's not what I'm saying. But don't hold back unnecessarily either. And have the confidence that you have so much to contribute. Our agency, the EEOC, is living proof that young people, because it was mostly the civil rights movement, was in many ways, a young people's movement, a young people's march, not only, but in many ways, can change the entire arc of the entire country through persistence. Otherwise, there would be no EEOC. That was a direct line from the 1963 March for Jobs and Justice, Jobs and Freedom, rather. We were the jobs part. And then came the Civil Rights Act in 64, and in 65, we opened our doors. And we continue to represent that bipartisan national consensus that civil rights has to be protected for all of us. And that's what people did at a time when they just believed it was the right thing. And everyone else was saying it's impossible. So you can do it too. Thank you.
And I would just leave you with a Ted Lasso quote that he took from Walt Whitman. It's my favorite episode. He said, "Be curious, not judgmental." There are people in your agencies that have spent their careers learning about a particular subject, becoming experts, and they care deeply about the thing that they worked on. And it might seem like the most obscure, the little part of the Code of Federal Regulations or something else. But there's a reason that they care so deeply about it and that they think that what they are working on is really important to the country. Be curious with those folks. They have a lot to offer, and most of them are very happy to share their time and talk to you about it if you show some interest. It can be a really rich experience. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jasmine, but just before I do that, thank you so much to all the panelists here today. Let's give them a round of applause. We really appreciate you coming and sharing your wisdom, your thoughts, your passions with our interns across the government. And with that, back to you, Jasmine.
Thank you again so much. And I speak on, I think, of behalf of everyone. Thank you so much for your time today as well. And thank you all for joining us today. This was a great discussion, and we hope to see all of you in the cafeteria and for those on screen in the networking event in the next few minutes. Thank you.
Panelists and guests, if it's okay, could the panelists take a moment to come to the front of the stage? Everyone, if you could sit and then quick. If that's okay. Could you stand in line in the front? Oh, the